And here we are. Hello, I'm Catherine Brown Ramsperger, author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls. You can call me Kathy. Welcome to my story hour. I created Story Hour to connect avid readers with brilliant writers. If you're one or both, you've come to the right place. And welcome. Today we'll be chatting with the distinguished and modest Dr. Fred Lehr. Dr. Lehr has a BA in sociology from Susquehanna University, an MD-DIV from Lutheran Theological Seminary, and a Doctor of Ministry from Drew University. He spent his career focusing on family dynamics, stress management, spiritual wellness, and the science of human behavior. He's certified as a family life educator by the National Council on Family Relations and is a Myers-Briggs and Life Orientations trainer. He's listed in Who's Who in Religion. He's the author of 3 books, including Power Currency, all nonfiction, spanning both subjects of the spirit and the mind. Welcome, Fred.
Hello.
So, if you would just show us your newest book cover.
Okay.
And I'm going to read the description. So it's a very interesting concept, power currency, that we're going to get into. And the concepts there are based on something most understand, our bank account balance. The concepts are explained and encouraging you to identify what you actually want beyond the material things that we're programmed to crave. After that, all you need to do, all haha in quotes, air quotes, is to understand the value of your own personal power, your mental, emotional, and spiritual portfolio, which needs to be managed properly to grow. Then after that, your accumulated power can be used to spend or on the important things of life. And we're going to talk more about the important things of life in a minute. So I've got one warning: be careful not to deplete your account, because then there's nothing left in the time of emergency. Power currency combines Fred's life of wisdom and experience, and there are gems in every chapter. So thank you, Fred, and you can put it down and let's get right to the Q&A. So I know this isn't your first book. I'm wondering if it's cumulative, if each book has built on the other, or are they all separate? It holds, like I said, a lot of gems about human behavior and change that I think are so needed right now.
There is a bit cumulative, yes. The first book was called Clergy Burnout. It came from my experience as a parish pastor. I'll be ordained 50 years in 22. But part of my career I spent at Good Shepherd Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania, managing their outpatient mental health department, but also running a treatment program exclusively for clergy. So I worked with 150 clergy in crisis. And so learning from that and what are the patterns, that was the work behind that book. Second book is Becoming a 21st Century Church. 80% of congregations are stagnant or dying. I don't accept that. And one of the main problems, there's a number of problems, but one is failure to adapt to the 21st century. So I looked at what are the characteristics and how we can do that. Again, they're churchy, but they're behavioral scientists. Then I have to say, my wife and my daughter said, you write these church books and hardly anybody reads them. You ought to write a book that everyone would read. So I thought, okay, I've always been curious about this whole personal power phenomenon. And so I reflected on 40 years of study and experience, and that's the book that we have now.
It really encompasses a lot. And I want to just comment on the 21st century church. I know my own church has been talking about the same issue for a couple decades now. And I would read that book, and I think every church should read the book.
Thank you. Yep.
So thank you for that. I've got another book to read. So why did you decide to study human behavior and become a therapist? And I'm gonna leave it an open question because
Yeah.
I think I kind of understand it, but I'd love to know more.
Well, I use the expression, I'm an incurable behavioral scientist. I'm just fascinated with people's behavior. Growing up, my family owned a grocery store. It was a real small mom and pop operation. So dad was in the back at the meat counter and I was up front with mom at the checkout. And I got to observe people. And I just found that almost addictive. It's fascinating. And I just ever since, I want to know more. Why do people do what they do? And how can I help them not make so many mistakes?
That's fantastic. And it makes sense in terms of being clergy and a therapist, not just because there is usually a religious therapist in every church that, I don't mean they come and go,
Mhm.
but because human behavior is part of everything, and
Yeah.
it's very evident in a church atmosphere or a work environment. So I'm so happy you wrote this because I think it is going to reach more people. So now onto the book itself. I want to concentrate on the lessons in the chapters, but I just want to tell everybody there are plenty of things we will not touch on because it's full of wisdom and Fred's experience and some great stories. I think we need to begin, Fred, with your definition of personal power.
Thank you. Yeah. Basically, power is how do I get what I want? Am I getting what I want out of life? And one of the main parts of that is what do I really want out of life? And I call that my long-term self-interest as opposed to all the short-term self-interest. Materialism, Jan, I like to sail. A sailboat's wonderful, but it's a short-term self-interest. Boats come and go. Finances. If you went through the crisis of 2008, I lost a third of my wealth overnight for no reason of my own. So what is it that I really want out of life? And am I empowered to get that? And after, again, years and years and years of trying to figure that out, I came to two things that I really want in life. One, I want to be more spiritually mature, have a closer relationship with the holy. And two, when I look in the mirror, I want to like the person I see.
Mm-hmm.
Who can deprive me of those things? Nobody. So I really have all the power I want. And then if I measure, should I do this or should I say this? Well, is that congruent with my long-term self-interest? Will this enhance my spiritual maturity, or will this enhance my self-esteem, or will it diminish any of those? So people have to find them for themselves. What is it you really want out of life? But if we, get away from the temporal and look at things that are more eternal or enduring, that's the better way to go.
I love that. I'm going to come back and listen to that definition a couple of times because it was rich. I think too often when we're young, and sometimes until the day we die, we think that money is what it's about, money and fame, and they are temporal. So I think that's a really rich definition of personal power. So do you think that definition and your approach are about the body, mind, and spirit? Are they philosophical, therapeutic, and spiritual? And why or why not? Do you think it's something that can guide all three?
It needs to be all three. My doctorate is in stress management and spirituality, and any good stress management technician will tell you we are body, mind, and spirit. And they all three interact. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I'm a native of Pennsylvania, grew up in Pennsylvania, went to college in Pennsylvania, seminary in Pennsylvania, married a girl from Pennsylvania. But my best friend in seminary was from New England. And he said, yeah, you ought to take a church in New England. So we ended up going to northern Vermont, moved in between Christmas and New Year. Not a good idea. The high for the day was 4 degrees. That was the high for the day. Well, I was like moving into another world. All of a sudden, I developed an allergy to my clergy collar. Now, I've worn the same collar for years, and it never bothered me. But now my body is saying, what have you done to me?
Mhm.
And if you don't slow down and say, this is a cultural shift, you're going to have to adapt. And the body is the court of last resort. If you don't pay attention, it's going to holler. In this case, so I ordered a clergy collar from a different company, put a little salve on, and it was fine. But the message to me was, my body's trying to tell me something. So we are physical, emotional, and spiritual people, and we need to pay attention to all 3.
Yeah. A lot of people don't listen to their bodies, and it's not a good thing, because in my viewpoint, your body holds everything else, and if it breaks down, you're going to be in trouble, and it's sending you messages, right? So that was a very interesting message. So you list a few qualities that are society lauds. I talked about a couple of them, including wealth, fame, physical adeptness, cunning, and manipulation. And I said I'd add physical beauty to that, especially within these Instagram days. And do you believe media and other social media contribute to this kind of pedestal worship? And what would you suggest as a way out of it?
Yeah, definitely. And I see the strengths and the weaknesses of all the social media. But even more, and you mentioned I'm a certified family life educator, I think parents are a key. My son has to figure out what is a man, what is a husband, what is a father, and he'll do that by observing me. The things that I tell him are mostly a waste of time. My daughter has to likewise figure out what is this thing called a man, a husband, and a father, and that's by observing. And likewise, daughter with our wife, my wife, and so forth. So the parental example, I think, is critical. And a lot of us succumb to the social pressures, the big car or the fancy house and all that kind of stuff, rather than saying, there are things that are deeper and more enduring. That's what I need to role model for my children. So, but my emphasis is on parenting.
Fantastic. Okay. You also speak about stereotyping, us versus them. A lot of my work is about that too. I used to, when my kids were in elementary school, I used to talk to their classes about a limitless, labelless life. And I'd love to do it again. But so if if somebody sees you for the first time and sees the superficial, I mean, impressions count. How do we get to the point that we see more than the outer layers of somebody? Is that conversation, or have other suggestions?
Well, I love to listen. I don't need to dominate in a conversation, and I find that if I listen first before I make any kind of assumptions, we all make assumptions.
Yeah.
But if I'm willing to go in with as much openness as I can, and likewise to be as open, transparent, honest, is a way to say that, in sharing of myself, I think that's the best way to go forward. We make so many assumptions about each other, and one of the big ones these days, as soon as you mention political party, oh my goodness, and then we label each other, like, oh well, he's one of them, and that's a big problem.
One of them. That should be stricken from our vocabulary. I sort of sit in shock, but I get it. I understand why it's happening, but it's shocking nonetheless because we're people, not red and blue.
Yep.
Totally agree with you. So one more question before we break for the audience to ask you a few. So I was reading along, and I, being a humanitarian and brought up in a Christian faith, believe in giving. And if you sow, you will reap, is kind of the biblical phrase. Do you think that still is the case these days? Is there enough giving in the world? And does win-win still work? Is really, especially in business, I'm wondering.
Yes. Well, I go back. One of the reasons my parents' business thrived was because they knew that Bud Lehr was honest. And, we got to know a lot of our customers' names, Bob, how you doing? What can I get for you? So it was that kind of friendly atmosphere. But the win-win really is the solution that makes the most sense. For example, I don't want to get COVID-19. The only way to guarantee I will not, or any of my loved ones, is to make sure no one gets COVID-19. If we all pull together and do what we need to do to squelch this disease, then it'll go away. But if I do competition, well, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of it? Which is what our culture stresses. Why should I? What's it going to cost me? I don't want to make the sacrifice. Well, then that's win-lose. And, the odds are you might lose. But if you play win-win, there's no losing. No one loses.
Right. And that's about negotiation, isn't it? Or is it?
It is. I can't collaborate with you unless I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't trust you unless I feel safe with you. So the root of it all, so when people are having trouble, collaborate. Then I ask them, what are you afraid of? If you collaborate, what are you afraid might happen? And how can I assure you that I'm in for you? To collaborate, both parties have to be into the self-interest of the other party. I want you to win. When it's all over, we both walk away as winners. So talk to me, tell me, what is it you need? And I pledge that I will try to get you that as much as I can without sacrificing what I want. And, we learn how to trust each other and build that together.
Fantastic answer. And because this is an author page with literary people here, I just want to say how much of that I've seen in the writing community over the past year. When launches couldn't happen in public, people stepped in, and I was one of them to make sure that the launch was able to happen online. And countless book clubs have sprung up, and I just think I have a wonderful community here. And I think most writers, I'm not sure I've met many writers that aren't like that. And so I want to commend them, and I want to say what a beautiful answer to the question. So thank you. So Kaylee, do we have any questions so far?
Yes. Hello, everybody. We do have a few questions so far. Excuse me. So we have one from Lucille Dorothy, and she begins with saying, spirituality is such a broad term. It is for me not enough. I can say I have a connection with a tree, but that provides no eternal life message. So do you believe in a heart connection to God or a living God who is in control?
Personally, I'm a Christian, a Lutheran pastor, but I have a chapter on spiritual power. I'm going to use a term, and I hope won't be, I'm not a religious bigot. It's not my way or the highway. Everyone has to believe the way I believe. I'm not there. But Jesus works for me. In the chapter, I talk about lots of world religions have really good stuff in them. I've studied world religions. Buddhists want to seek harmony with everything, not just harmony with each other, but harmony with the trees and the plants. And I think that's fantastic. Taoism, the teachings of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu has an expression that I just love. Lao Tzu said, where there's light, call it light. You know, where there's truth, call it truth. I mean, you know, it's just brilliant. So yes, for me, Christianity gives me an eternal source of hope, something that I can trust that cannot die because Jesus conquered death. But that doesn't mean everyone has to believe the way I believe. What I'm urging in that chapter on spiritual power is you find your spiritual anchor. You find what it is that works for you, that gives you that that connection to eternity and a hope that is sustainable.
Right. She also continued with another question, and she first says, there is never a time to not give. She's reading a book called The Way of the Master by Ray Comfort, and she's wondering if you've ever heard of him.
No, I don't know. No, sorry.
Kathy, do you?
I don't know. I'm going to write it down now.
Okay. Yes. It's in the comments. Way of the Master by Ray Comfort.
The Master.
And we do have another question from Tatiana Ramsoff, and she asks, what exactly is being emotionally bankrupt?
Well, now I'm going to go into my mental health field. When people are depressed, or even back up more, my work with clergy, sometimes it gets so frustrating. You know, they work really hard to get the congregation to do this or that, and people don't really make a commitment, and so it doesn't work. And after a while, it's like, well, why bother? And I think they take the emotional volume knob and turn it all the way off. We call that going numb, because it hurts too much to feel. You know, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried and it hasn't worked. So I'm just going to turn the volume knob off and just go through the motions and not feel. That's another expression for depression, and that's an illness that we need to take carefully, because depression can kill. So beware if you find yourself, you know, I can't handle all the emotions. It's too much. I'm just going to turn my emotion volume knob off. That's dangerous. Please don't go there.
And we have one more question, and it's from Noelle Puglisi, and she's asking, is there a difference between a writer and an author? If so, which do you consider yourself and why?
Oh. Well, I've only written 3 books, so I'm hardly not, you know. But I consider myself an author, or I mean a writer. I, you know, if you're a parish pastor, you write a sermon every week, all that kind of stuff. So I've written a lot of stuff over the years. And so I consider more of myself a writer.
That's an interesting question. I don't think I ever thought about separating the two. What about you, Kathy?
So they're synonyms to me, but there's a slight differentiation, but it could just be my own mind, right? I always felt like if I published a book, I had arrived and I was an author. And I think of write as a verb and author as a noun. Like an author is an identity and a writer writes, and you have to write before you become an author. But I know a lot of people that use them very interchangeably. I was with a bunch of second graders, I think, once. They were like, what have you published? Which actually goes back to Fred's point on, you know, fame. It has to be fame. I don't think being an author is about fame, but I do think it is about experience. And I think you're both, Fred, but.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank everybody. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to continue I want to interject just a bit to make sure we have enough time. If you have tips on stress right now during the holidays in terms of COVID and 2020, and that's kind of I threw that in there. But if we have time at the end and you have 2 or 3 things, I would love to leave the viewers with that, because this
Yeah.
isn't an easy month. Um, so, but back to the book. I love and agree with this, what you say about this tenet. No one can take from me my spiritual maturity or self-esteem. So that means I possess all the power I will ever need to fulfill my own long-term self-interests. And also this one, self-interest and selfishness are not the same. So can you expand on these? Because there were a few places in the book that I I wrote down, and that was one of them. I I wonder about spiritual maturity and self-esteem, and how people get there, or how you got there, or okay, let you speak.
Well, yeah, one of the most important teachings of the book is the difference between long-term and short-term self-interest. And self-interest sounds a lot like selfish, but selfish is in fact a short-term. I won't gain power by being selfish. There's a paradox in power. The more you hoard power, the less powerful you are. The more you empower, the more power. A quick story with that, and if I get too long, to tell me. Or when I had got my master's degree, and my first call in church was to a large congregation, and I was the young youth pastor, second in command, if you will, but a rookie, absolute rookie. Senior pastor, a very dedicated church person, but his style was, in German we call it Herr Pastor. He had all the answers. So he would come to the leadership team meeting and say, I've done my homework and this is the right thing for us to do, and this is what we're going to do. And he would just tell them. And they nod their heads, but they weren't very invested in it. Ended up, he had a heart attack. He survived, he did fine. But for several months, I was thrown into the lead position as an absolute rookie. So I go to that same meeting and say, you know what? I don't have a clue. What do you think we ought to do? And for the first time, they were empowered. Their opinions mattered. And their morale went up, productivity went up. So we got better results by empowering rather than hoarding power and just telling people, well, look, I have the answers and here, go do this. So that's an important lesson. Another quick, where this came from. Viktor Frankl wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. Life-changing book for me. Frankl survived the death camps in Nazi Germany. And he noticed in those if hell ever had a mailing address, the death camps would fit the definition. So most of the people walked around with their heads down, their shoulders bent. They were in despair. This is hell. But you notice several of the detainees still had their heads up, their shoulders back. Their dignity was intact. Because those people knew the truth. Yes, you can torture me, you can abuse me, you can even kill me. But you can't take my self-worth unless I give it to you. That's power.
I love what you say about empowering people, and I think that's part of it. I was called in a lot to mediate on the low levels of, not low levels, but I wasn't called in to global leaders to mediate. I was doing it on the Red Cross, Red Crescent level about projects. So would you speak to us about the proper and improper uses of accommodation, avoidance, compromise, competing, and collaboration? You've touched on collaboration a little bit. And how do we build trust in a team, or for that matter, between countries in the world, or blue and red states?
You got it. You got it. Okay. And I have a grid in the book, and it.
Feel free to show it if it helps.
Okay. Yeah. Got that? So on the side, going up and down is relationship, how important. A 1 is it's not important, 9 it's very important. And across the bottom is the task. 1 is not important, and a 9 it's very important. So a common avoidance is a 1.1. I don't want to bother with it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to avoid and just let it go. Well, that's the lose-lose option. No one wins. It's proper if the issue is trivial, hopeless resolution, cost is too high, confrontation, all that kind of stuff. But it's improper. There's no real communication. Energy goes into avoiding, and decisions are made by default, and there's no ownership, there's no commitment. So go up to the top of that relationship scale, accommodation. You win, I lose. Here's a no-brainer. If I'm wrong, then you ought to win and I need to lose. I mean, duh. That also builds what I call power currency. You know, oh, you did me a favor. You let me have things my way, and something that I can cash in later. The improper uses for that is I relinquish my influence. Why does Fred always give in? And also my input. We don't know what Fred thinks. He's always giving in. So those are the negatives for accommodation. Sometimes we do that as a way to build trust, though. Here, let me, let you win for a little bit, so you understand that I'm not out to hurt you, that I really care about you and what you want. In the middle, we call 5.5, because it's halfway in relationship, halfway on task, is compromise. There's a lot of misunderstanding. People think if they took a compromise, they got a solution. No, a compromise is in lieu of a solution. Compromise is when the issue is too costly, we can't continue to fight. There's opponents are of strong positions, and we need an answer. There's a time pressure. Yeah, like right now with this whole COVID, thing that people's money is running out. The government's got to do something, so they're talking about a compromise right now. But notice that's not a solution. Mm-hmm. That's instead of a solution. But when it's the best you can take, you take it. Bottom right-hand corner, 1, 9, 1 on relationship and 9 on task. This is compete. I win, you lose. Well, classic example would be racism. I'm sorry, I'm not going to collaborate on racism. If you're a racist, I'm going to oppose you all that I can. So there are proper uses. Improper is if maybe I'm wrong, and you're right. Close subordinates off I'm learning. The guy who came to the meeting and said, I'm going to tell you what to do. That's really my way or the highway. So, there are ways to do either. Now, the collaboration is a win-win, and results in well-rounded, fair, integrated solutions, especially when the stakes are high. When high commitment, not only do we want to make a decision, but we want to implement the decision, and works through hard feelings and builds trust. The negative is you can make too much out of a trivial because collaboration takes time and effort. Example I use, if my secretary buzzes me and says, I have your papers here, do you want a paper clip or a staple? That's not a time to collaborate. It's just, I don't care, pick one, or avoiding personal responsibility. But the big learning, if you want to win, the one where you always win is collaboration. That's built on trust, and trust is built on feeling safe.
I think our nation couldn't have been built with a certain dissension, but definitely with a huge collaboration. And I think that's our way back.
When we've been successful, it's been through collaboration. When we are at each other's throat, we tear each other down. I think it was Bob Dole who said, my political opponent was not my enemy. He was just my opponent. Yeah. It used to be the expression, the loyal opposition. I think we need to reclaim that expression.
I like that. Okay, I'm not going to let you go until we talk about Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite things, and I think it might be one of yours too. So I thought I'd use this as an example. You say INT in the book, you say INTPs and INFPs, which you or I can explain that. It doesn't matter which one.
Right.
Don't play well in the sandbox. Why is that, and how can they play better? And I'm wondering if your hanging mobile example might be part of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's also part of family systems theory, the mobile. But let's first do the Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
The INFP and INTP, the difference is that T versus F. T means, and this is all preference, not what is your ability, but what do you prefer to do?
Mhm.
A person who is a T prefers to be rational, logical, make decisions with their head. Person who's an F is more sensitive, caring, compassionate, and prefers to make decisions with their heart. So the F will see the T as cold and heartless, and the T will see the F as wishy-washy and illogical. And so there's that fighting with each other. The thing with the mobile and the family systems, families learn to balance each other, and it's like a mobile. If one person decides, let's take a classic example, a family system where I took mom, dad, junior, and sister, where dad's a drunk. The family arranges this mobile to keep dad in the family and somehow put up with his drinking. If the rest of the family says, you know what, no, we're not going to put up with the drinking anymore. Dad, you need to get sober or get out. You've now majorly reconfigured the mobile. There will naturally be a lot of resistance because you've now taken us in a new whole range of behavior we've never been before. We don't know how to do it. It's the right thing to do, but it's difficult. So when you make those kind of changes in a family system, even though they're exactly the right thing to do, and we know we need to do this, just please understand you're causing stress. And it's going to take patience and understanding to reconfigure that mobile until it's balanced in a new way.
Going back to the Myers-Briggs, so I means introverted, N means intuitive, meaning that you don't have to have, you're not, I'm intuitive and so I'm not as mathematical. I'll just put it like that. And you explain the T and the F, and P is it
Perceiving.
perception? Perceiving. And so they have everything in common except the T and the F. And so if one person opened up a little bit more to emotion and the other person opened up a little bit more to logical solutions, then they would be collaborating better.
Right.
Right.
If you're putting together a work team, for instance, you want diversity because then they bring everything into the team. Sometimes the interpersonal relationships, you have to, that's why they have marriage counseling, so you can come together and say, well, he's like this and she's like that. Neither of them are wrong. And they both bring something very valuable to the relationship. So can we value this difference and make a positive out of it rather than a negative?
Okay, thank you for that. That really helps. I want to make certain that you have enough time to tell people where they can find your book or books.
Okay.
And where listeners can find you. Then I'm going to turn it back over to Kaylee for a few audience questions if they're there, and we will close with how to handle stress right now.
Okay. Good news, it just found out yesterday the book is now also an Audible.
Oh, that's
so
fantastic.
If you're one who reads books through listening, that's available. So the book is basically online. I prefer Barnes and Noble. Nothing against Amazon, but they're making plenty of money. So I prefer Barnes and Noble. You can, if you just Google Fred Lehr too, you'll find it. But it's available through those major things. And the way to get in touch with me, Diane 9, and INE is my agent. And so her email is 9speakers, NINESPEAKERS @USA.net. And so she would set up kind of, I would love to do workshops, speaking engagements, retreats, whatever. So if you'd like me to do that, please contact Diane.
Fantastic. Thank you. Kaylee, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we have one last question from Lucille. And she's asking, are you relating right brain and left brain to this? And by this, I think she's probably referring to the personality types. So do you think that plays in any sort of role when it comes to being intuitive or more logical?
Yeah, it does. I'm not a neurologist, so I won't try to make myself look stupid. But that's a balance issue again. Right brain functions, are very important, and left brain functions are very important. And it's not one needs to dominate over the other, but how do we understand, oh, that's right brain or that's left brain, and how do we bring the two together in a way that honors both of them?
I think that's a solid answer.
Thank you.
And that's all we have.
Thanks. Hey, Kaylee, do you have any questions?
I don't think so. I'm thinking a lot about some of the work I did in college. I was a sustainability major, and we focused a lot on behavior change in some of the work I did. And sometimes I would get caught up about being worried that instead of trying to find a middle ground with people so that we can come to a consensus about moving forward in a more sustainable way, and convincing people to believe what I believe is right. So when there's something like climate change, which is considered a fact, and some people it's not considered a fact, it's a hard place to come to a consensus about, when there's two different realities at play, I suppose. So I'm reflecting on what you're saying. And so I don't think I necessarily have a question. It's just, I'm definitely thinking about it. So
well, the key task would be, if we did it my way, what are you afraid will happen? And if we did it your way, this is what I'm afraid will happen. And can you listen to each other and say, how can we address each other's fears in a way that allows us to move forward together?
Right. I think that's a good way to go about it, because it is addressing the needs at hand, or the perceived needs. So that's interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And developing trust too.
Exactly. And that does, if someone will listen to me, then I can trust them more.
Right.
As opposed to telling me.
Yeah.
And that's come on, that's a real temptation. Of course I'm right. How can you be so stupid?
Yeah, or demonizing somebody that doesn't believe in it. Yeah. There was somebody that came into a training session we had at the place I worked at in college, and it was all about behavior change, and demonizing people and telling them that they're wrong doesn't help them learn in any sort of way. It just makes them more angry or believe in what they think even more. So I think that's a great point.
Yep.
I love that example. Thank you both. So, Fred, would you like to close with a few tips about how to lessen stress during the month of December, or until we get a vaccine, or however far in the future you'd like to go?
Well, as you know, there's a whole chapter in what I call regaining balance.
Right.
And part of it, simple things like giving yourself permission to do nothing. And sometimes that's really difficult, but we need downtime. There was a Herbert Benson, there's a Harvard research physician. He wrote a book, I'm going blank on it, the Relaxation Response.
Right.
And where he realized that people who take time to meditate, calm down and just relax for a while, one, they don't get sick as often. And when they do get sick, they get well quicker. He, by the way, also wrote a second beyond relaxation response, where he actually went further and said people who have a faith system, belong to a faith community and a regular faith practice, takes that even further. So how do we calm down, manage our time? Someone says to me, I don't have any time. Whose fault's that? Because you manage your own time. A quick example of that. Young in my ministry, I was serving a congregation where I had over 30, we call shut-ins, people who are homebound. And so I left early in the morning to go visit a bunch of these shut-ins all over hither and yon. Got home late in the afternoon, grab a quick meal, and I'm ready to head out the door for a church meeting that night. And my 4-year-old son said, "So long, Dad. Thanks for stopping by." Went through me like a knife. Got a hold of my calendar and said, no, there will be at least one full day off and at least 2 full evenings every week. And I would write them in. If someone said, "Are you available?" I'd say, "Nope, I'm not available." So
That's a perfect message for me for the month of January. Thank you for that one. We have to have a life, and we have to have a family if we have, or we have to have friends if we don't have children.
Yeah.
And pets, and we have other things besides work. And I think in America, sometimes we forget that. And the more entrepreneurs we have these days, me included, the more we do it all. Like we wear 5 million hats. And I love that message, especially at Christmas time and Hanukkah time, and time where people will be able in whatever way to connect with community for more support.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any final words of wisdom?
Long-term self-interest. That's the biggest part of this whole thing. And then I talk about power currencies. There are long-term power currencies like kindness and being considerate, and short-term power currency, like I'm Dr. Lehr. And no, you have to call me Dr. Lehr. That's a short-term power currency that wears out. So study the book and learn about long-term and short-term power currencies, long-term and short-term self-interest, and as you say, a whole host of other lenses to understand power. Oh, and by the way, the book is not just personal, it's family power, it's organizational power. So it fits all those different categories. So thank you for this opportunity. This is fantastic.
It was my honor. I love doing this, and my pleasure. And thank you for being with us, Fred. And I want to tell everybody out there we have a guest, Darlene Chadbourne, next week, who will be talking about 2021 a little bit. You can find the full list of upcoming story hours here on my author page on Facebook. You can also watch the replay here. And you know where to find Fred. You can find out more about me and my work at shoresofoursouls.com, including some of my stories and essays, and ground1coaching.com. Thank you again, Dr. Fred Lehr, for your time and your wisdom. And this is Kathy Ramsperger from shoresofoursouls.com, bidding everyone a good weekend and a great book to read. Thank you. Bye.